So glad you're here. This is Jennifer, and thank you for visiting. Now, I have a large handful of favorite techniques that I like to revisit once in a while, and today's definitely fits the bill. This is a technique that allows you to use die cuts to create a faux letterpress look. Letterpress is where you take paper and press an image into it and leave ink or color behind, and this technique is so easy. You don't need any specialty tools, basically the supplies you have on hand, and pretty much any dies you may have. And stay tuned, at the end of this video, I'll link to another video I did many years ago using the same technique if you want more ideas. Let's get started with this example. I'm using two new die sets from Gina Designs. On the left, we have the Elegant Cross dies, which includes that intricate die and the solid. Then we have the Eastern Shadow dies, which includes the word Easter and the shadow die also. I took the intricate cross die and I cut it 3 times, twice from a heavyweight white cardstock and then once from vellum. I used 110-pound cardstock, and I'll link to the one that I use below. If you're using something thinner, you may need to do 3 cardstock die cuts to make the technique work. It's something that you'll have to play with, and I'll talk about it as we go. But I found this worked great in every case. So I glued the 2 cardstock die cuts together, and then on top of that, I'm gluing the vellum die cut. I use spray adhesive, but you could use a liquid adhesive, and you could use like a glue pen, anything that won't add bulk to this. This layered die cut will be our letterpress tool that we can use over and over again. Now, I like to use this letterpress die cut onto a cardstock that has a little give to it. So I choose to use Tim Holtz watercolor paper. Any watercolor paper would work. If you have any kind of letterpress cardstock, that would work too. If you only have regular cardstock, you can do it. I'll give you a little tip on that later. But I chose to use Tim Holtz watercolor paper because it works great and it's bright white. So I have cut a piece of the Tim Holtz watercolor paper using one of the Gina Designs Master Layouts dies. She has lots of master layout dies that include lots of dies in the set, and it gives you different basic shapes that you can use on cards. This one cut a piece with a faux stitching on the inside edge, and I thought it'd be great for today's card. I will be demonstrating this technique with the Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine. You can use whatever machine you have. You'll want to follow the instructions that your particular machine gives for making an impression with a die. That's the sandwich that you'll need for today's technique. For the Spellbinders, it's that large platform, and then this tan embossing mat that's very flexible. It allows you to make an impression instead of cut. I have my watercolor die cut here, and I'm using a baby wipe on both sides just to add a little moisture. You could instead do a light mist of water on both sides, but I find this works better. And I'll take this and I'll lay it right onto that tan embossing mat. Next, I have some dye inks. These are from Gina Designs. I recommend using any kind of dye ink or distress ink for this. You could try pigment or oxide inks, but I feel dye works really well. I'm pressing my die ink directly onto the vellum die cut. So remember, this is 2 layers of cardstock with vellum on top. I'm putting the inks onto the vellum. The vellum doesn't absorb that ink really, so it's just sitting on the surface. So I can now pick this up and lay it face down onto my watercolor paper, trying not to wiggle it. We don't want to mess up the ink. I'll just lay it there, put the embossing plate on top, according to the instructions of my machine, and run that through. And what's happening is the thickness of that cross-layered die cut presses into the paper, leaving an impression, and that ink we put on the vellum layer leaves the ink behind on our cardstock. Isn't that beautiful? It looks even better in real life. This is a great thing you can do with any of your die cuts, especially intricate ones like this. So let's make another panel. I'm using the same layered die cut. You can use it over and over. I have another watercolor paper panel here, and I'm using the baby wipe on both sides. If you don't have watercolor paper, you could instead use regular cardstock. Just make sure you add that bit of moisture with a baby wipe or a light mist of water to avoid cracking. If you find your paper that you're pressing into still cracks, you might want to remove one of the die cut layers from that letterpress cross so that it has less pressure to apply. So if you try this technique, I would start with maybe 1 cardstock die cut with the vellum layer glued on top and see if it does enough. If it impresses enough, you're good to go. But if you have a Spellbinders machine like me, I would do the 2 layers with the vellum on top. You just don't want to force anything through your machine. So I was able to make several this way. When doing a letterpress type look, I usually use a light ink, but here I thought it'd be fun to do kind of an ombre color. And I'm using some new inks from Gina Designs. This is her latest card kit called Watercolor Spring, and it has 2 stamp sets, a pad of pattern paper, 2 stencils, all these pre-colored die cuts, coordinating die cuts for the stamp set. It's got lots of stuff in it. Now, I think this kit has sold out, but it will be coming back in stock. In this kit, there are the 6 new ink color cubes. Wanted to show you the colors. These will be available separately later on. Beautiful colors, and I'm using the 3 kind of pinkish red there that you see on my next example. I just wanted to give you a closer look at the 6 colors. We have light, medium, and dark carnation, and then we have light, medium, and dark spruce. I love that carnation color because it's kind of a peachy red, beautiful. And then the green has a little bit of a blue tint to it. So it really helps to kind of round out the Gina K ink collection. I'm using the 3 pinker inks, the carnation ones, on that same layered cross die cut. Again, I'm applying the ink to the vellum side, and then I'll do dark towards the bottom, medium towards the middle, and light towards the top. If you're having trouble blending those colors, you can use a blending brush to smooth the transition right there on the vellum. Then I'll pick that up and put that onto my watercolor paper piece that I've already prepped with a bit of baby wipe. Run that back and forth and look at that beautiful ombre. This is such an easy and really forgiving technique that is definitely worth a try. Now, before we go on to more letterpress examples, let's turn these 2 into cards. I use that Easter die set, and I die cut the word Easter twice from white cardstock and once from gold cardstock. And I glued those 3 layers together. This will give it dimension that'll allow it to stand out from the letterpress cross that we have on our card. Before we glue everything together, I wanted to add that faux stitching detail to the note card. To do this, I'm using the Concord & 9th Quilted card die. This does not cut anything, it just adds a faux stitching. So I put the die on the front panel of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card and ran that through my die cut machine, and it adds a faux stitching look. Now this is my letterpress panel. I did mat it with a pink cardstock, and behind that pink cardstock, I glued 3 layers of scrap white cardstock. These were just mess up pieces from stamping that I did, and that will give some dimension to that letterpress piece, make it stand out on my card. I don't like to use foam tape unless I have to because I find it gets squished in the mail. This will make our card nice and strong to go through the mail. On top of that, I added our gold layered Easter die cut that I showed you earlier, and I added a few pearls here and there to the cross. This is a very clean and simple card, at least for me, but we added a lot of interest by doing that faux letterpress technique and also adding dimension behind that panel on the front of the card. So I used a really intricate large die for this, but you could even use an intricate large background die or a small solid die. It really doesn't matter. This technique seems to work with everything. Here's one of the other cards I did. This time I used some blue cardstocks, again some white pearls to add interest. Simple card design, but amazing technique that really makes it stand out. All right, now let's do another example. This time I'm using 2 layered die cuts to make an impression at once. Now for this, I'm using the new Gina Designs Botanical Duo die set. It includes those 2 dies you see there in the middle, beautiful intricate dies that are great for this technique. So I did a bunch of die cutting from white cardstock and vellum. The reason I like to use white is you can kind of see through and make sure you're putting a good amount of ink on top. If you use colored die cuts, you might not be able to tell as much. All right, so you can see these are beautiful intricate die cuts. Now here's the thing, you can glue your 2 cardstock die cuts together, and then you can either glue the vellum on the front or the back. So you can actually use the die cut as is or reversed, which you'll see me do the kind of mirror look here in a moment. So it doesn't matter if you put the vellum on the top of the stacked die cuts or on the back of the stacked die cuts. Doesn't matter at all, it just gives a different orientation. And it actually allows you to be more creative. So let me show you an example. These are 2 stacked die cuts. It's 2 cardstock die cuts glued together, both of them. The one on the left, I'm going to glue the vellum on the front. The one on the right, I'm going to glue the vellum on the back. That way, one of them will be the reverse of the other. So I've glued this one on the left together. Vellum is on the top, 2 white die cuts behind it. This one over here, vellum is gluing to the back of the 2 stacked white die cuts. So now if I put both of these so the vellum faces up towards the camera, they'll be mirror images of each other, which is fun because it allows you to change up a design, do something symmetrical, just get more from your die cuts. Okay, so I have a watercolor paper panel here using the baby wipe on both sides to add a little bit of moisture, laying that onto my embossing mat. And then we have our 2 stacked die cuts here. The vellum is facing up towards the camera, and I'm applying some different inks on here. These are from Gina K. I thought it'd be fun to do some greens. You could do absolutely any colors here. Again, I usually like the lighter colors, but here this is the dark spruce color, or maybe the medium, and that is pretty dark and it still works great. Now I'm carefully laying these down onto the watercolor paper. You don't want to move them too much because it might leave a little line of ink behind. And I put my embossing plate on top, run it through. That presses the layered die cut into our watercolor paper and leaves that ink behind. That's why I put vellum on the top layer. You can put the ink on the vellum and it stays wet, so that when you transfer this onto the watercolor paper and push it through, the ink transfers from the vellum onto your watercolor paper. I tried it with acetate, but vellum works much better. Okay, so now I am using the Gina K Designs Forever die set. This has the word forever and a shadow die. I cut the word from forever twice from a light green cardstock and glued that together. I cut the shadow twice from a dark green cardstock and glued those together. Then I will layer these together. Usually I use white for the shadow and black for the word. This time I used colors that match the background, and I'm really glad I did that. It changes up the card quite a bit. Now for a little sentiment strip underneath that, I used this older Friendly Silhouettes stamp set from Gina K Designs, and I white heat embossed Thankful on the dark green cardstock and glued it right below the word forever. So here is the completed card. I did mat our watercolor paper panel with a dark green cardstock. Then I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch green top folding note card where I used that Concord and 9th quilted die once again. You can see how this is all greens and whites. I think it's fun to use colored cardstock for your sentiments instead of always using white and black. I did also add some white pearls there. Those are from Trinity Stamps, and I'll have them linked below. And I like how it adds just a little bit of interest to the background. Now this I stepped up a bit, but you could definitely keep those letterpress leaves quite simple. Now earlier with the stacked cross die cuts, you saw how easy it was to do multiple letterpress looks at once. So I did multiple with these leaves. I did the exact same technique on the background, but this time I changed up the sentiment, and I used one from this Gina K Design 6x8 stamp set that has beautiful sentiments in it. I chose that small hello friend, and I gold heat embossed that onto a little die cut circle and matted it with a green die cut circle. I put that all onto a green note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, where I used that Concord and 9th quilt die again. Here I did put some gold little gemstones here and there to match the gold embossing of the hello friend. Once again, I'm really trying to let a lot of that letterpress technique shine, let it show, because in real life, the light catches it really nice and you can see that added dimension. The impression this technique makes is amazing. All right, so let's do another one with that same stacked die cut. Once you create that stacked die cut, you can do the technique again and again. The sentiment on this one is from this 4x6 stamp set that is included in that card kit that I showed you earlier, and I really like the sentiments in this. I used one of the stacked die cut leaves from our last example, and this time I did the technique off screen on a smaller piece of watercolor paper. I just wanted to show you that you don't have to use a large piece, something smaller will also work, and I stamped a sentiment from the stamp set I just showed you. Here I'm tying together 3 strands of gold thread to make a loose bow that I'll glue at the base of those leaves. I'm adding this on to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card that I used that Concord and 9th quilt faux stitch background die on. You can see I have additional cardstock layers behind this letterpress panel so it stands out and has a bit of dimension. Then I can just cut the excess off the edge. Now I can use a drop of liquid adhesive to hold that bow in place while it dries, and there we have our completed card. By the way, the liquid adhesive I'm using for all of today's cards is Gina K Connect, and I've put it into her new fine tip bottle. Love this system. Haven't had any problems with it. I'll link to it all below. So here is the completed card. Very simple card, but because we use that letterpress technique on it, it really has something interesting that stands out. Now remember the Gina K Designs Botanical Duo die set that I showed you? It had 2 dies. One was the leaf, which I used on the last couple cards. Now I'm going to use the other die on the next 2 cards. I'm also using the Gina K Designs Master Layouts die set that is great for slimline cards. Even if you don't make slimline, this size die cut is great to create like a little panel for a regular card or a little bookmark design. I also like that these master layout designs offer dies that create a tiny little mat for the main die cut pieces. I'm not using that in today's card, but remember that's available in these master layout design sets. If you struggle with dimensions and creating a nice mat for a piece, these sets are very helpful. Okay, so I used the large rectangle with the faux stitching on the inside edge and cut that from watercolor paper. Now I'm doing the same letterpress technique, but using a stacked die cut created with the Floral Botanical Duo die. So once again, it's 2 heavyweight white cardstock die cuts with 1 vellum die cut on top. Onto the vellum, I'm applying those carnation ink colors from the card kit. I did the dark towards the bottom, the medium towards the middle, and the light towards the top. I wanted to make sure those kind of give a blended look in the final results. So I'm tapping it with my blending brush just to make sure there aren't any harsh lines from the edge of the ink pads. This is very helpful, something that works really well with this technique. So be sure to try any dye inks or distress ink for this technique. Now I'm laying that down onto my watercolor paper very carefully, putting the embossing plate on top, running it through, and look at these beautiful faux letterpress results. I really like this color combination with this flower so much that I ended up doing 2 cards this way. For one of them, I made a mini slimline card. So this is 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. And you can see how that die cut fits nicely in the front center. I used this same die to create a white panel to go on the inside. So it has that same faux stitching and the inside matches the outside very nicely. I did stamp Thank You for Being a Friend from the Gina K Designs Delightful Daisy stamp set that I showed you earlier. And then I just added a gold thread bow at the base of the letterpress flowers. So this card did not take much time at all. All right, here is the second card I made using that letterpress with the flower. This time it's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I used the same die cut, but I positioned it towards the top right and cut the excess off the top. And below it, I stamped Wishing You a Beautiful Day. Now in this case, I stamped the Wishing You a Beautiful Day with black ink onto the note card before I used the Concord and 9th quilted die. It's best to stamp before you use any kind of texture on a background so you can get a crisp image. Okay, these next few cards I think are my favorite because of the color inks used, but you could use whatever colors you want. This time I'm using the new Gina K Designs Foliage Filler die set. You can see the dies there on the bottom. I like that these dies leave impression details, but what I did is I cut them a bunch. So over on the left, we have 2 white die cuts glued together with vellum on the top. On the right, we have 2 white die cuts glued together with vellum on the bottom. So that, remember, I can get the regular image or the reverse image when we do the letterpress. I just wanted to have a bunch of leaves ready to go for this technique so we could cover a background if we wanted to. But for this first example, let's just use 3 die cuts. I have a watercolor paper panel, and I've used my baby wipe on it just to add a little moisture. I do feel that helps in preventing cracking of your cardstock. So I'm using 3 colors of Gina K Designs today. Again, any dye inks work, but I love her colors. They're just the best. So on one of them, I put green ink onto the vellum, and I place that in position. Then I'll pick up the next one, and I'll put the Peach Bellini, the best color of all time, onto the vellum side and lay that down. And then I'll use sea glass on the vellum of the last one and then lay that down. Notice when I lay it down, I try not to move it too much so that I don't leave ink where I don't want it on that watercolor panel. Once I have them all in place, I carefully put the embossing plate on top, run it back and forth, and that will leave an impression and leave that ink behind. And look how beautiful that is. If it looks a little splotchy at first, don't worry. These inks have kind of a smoothing agent in them, which allows it to kind of smooth over time, and you'll get beautiful results. Now for this one, I die cut a taller panel from that Master Layouts die set I showed on the last examples. And I'm using many of these layered letterpress die cuts to cover the entire panel. So look at this. You can do lots of them to cover a complete background if you want to. The sky is the limit with this technique, and it's a great way to get more from your die cuts. And remember, those layered die cuts with the 2 cardstock and the 1 vellum glued together can be kept and used over again in the future. Just keep them in with your dies so you have them ready to go. For this card, I trimmed down that letterpress panel and added it to the top center of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. For the sentiment, I used the Gina K Master Designs layout set that includes the friend dies. This is the word friend and the shadow die, and I cut those from 2 shades of teal cardstock and glued it onto the card. For a little sentiment strip below the word friend, I white heat embossed a sentiment from the Gina K Designs lace flower stamp set that you see over there to the right. That's white heat embossed on the matching teal cardstock. By sticking to colors that are in my card, that teal color, instead of using black and white, I create a more subtle card. Here's the completed version. I did add some shine to it using these Trinity Stamps Shimmer and Shine Confetti. I like these because they're different sizes. They really catch the light nicely, but they don't have any bulk to them. So if you like to keep your cards without too much dimension, this is a great option. I glued a few of those in the background, and I just felt like it added some interest, but you could keep it simple by skipping them. Once again, you can see I used the Quilted cover die from Concord and 9th on the note card just to add a little bit of interest. All right, let's finish off the other panels that we made using the same die cut letterpress leaf images. Now in this one and the next one, I used craft cardstock as the accent for it. I white heat embossed So Very Grateful for You from that delightful Daisies set that I showed you earlier. Then I used the Gina K Designs sentiment strip die set to cut them out. If you have a hard time cutting your sentiment strips, I recommend getting a die set like this. It really is easy to look through the dies and line up the sentiment so you get a nice, even sentiment strip in the end. I like to glue additional scraps of cardstock behind it to give it strong dimension. I added this to the center of our letterpress panel and added all of that onto a craft note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I really like the look of that craft along with those soft colors I used for the letterpress, but you could definitely use white or black if you prefer more contrast. And here is another card where I use the same letterpress elements, but I just position them next to each other to create a landscape card. This is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Again, on both of these cards, I used those Shimmer and Shine confetti from Trinity Stamps just to catch the light nicely. They look like they're purplish in the video, but they really don't have any color, just an iridescent shine. And this is just a very simple design, but because we use the letterpress, it really steps it up quite a bit. This is really one of the easiest techniques and the best ways to get more from your dies. I really hope you'll give it a try. If you're interested in the supplies I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description. At the end here, I will have a link to another video using more ideas, and I'll have a link to my blog where I have much more information, including cards that you can bookmark and save. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day. See you soon.